What's the first thought that comes to mind when you think about Spartans? Many of us will conjure up an image of the Battle of Thermopylae as depicted loosely in the 2007 film 300. The common understanding of the battle is that 300 ruling-class Spartiate soldiers took on a massive million-man Persian army. The Spartiates were vastly outnumbered, but they did have a big terrain advantage. To pass through Thermopylae, the Persian army had to enter a geographical funnel. This advantage allowed the small group of Spartiates to fight back against the Persian advance for 3 days, taking out tens of thousands of enemy combatants. In the Battle of Thermopylae, the group of 300 was led by their king, Leonidas, who committed to this kamikaze mission to help slow the Persian advance on a collective of Greek city-states. He fought alongside his fellow Spartiates as another soldier, and among them he died a noble Spartan death. It sounds pretty heroic and admirable, doesn't it? Do you ever find yourself wishing you could learn about the values and practices that made these soldiers so formidable? It would make you unstoppable, wouldn't it? But before discussing how their virtues could help us in our daily lives, let's add some details to the Battle of Thermopylae. Keep in mind that there were numerous differing historical accounts of this period of time, and every fact has to be taken with a grain of salt. It's more likely that Sparta sent 300 foot soldiers, also known as hoplites, and roughly 6,000 more Greeks from the region surrounding Thermopylae. The Persian army was more like hundreds of thousands strong, not millions, and by all accounts, the Spartans and Greeks fought with tremendous spirit. However, they were ultimately wiped out in a battle that would not be particularly noteworthy from the Persian perspective. Thanks to a local goat herd that had no idea of the historic role it would play in the final outcome at Thermopylae, the Persians found a route behind the Greeks. If Sparta had sent more of its army to the strategically advantageous funnel at Thermopylae, it could have likely had a much more significant impact on the Persian invasion. The Spartans gave reasons after the fact, but none seemed to hold up to scrutiny. No one really knows for sure why they didn't send more of their army, but by getting to know Spartan society, we might have some better guesses. So what can we learn from the values of these soldiers who fought courageously against impossible odds, but strategically made some questionable calls? To understand the answer to this question, we have to know these hoplites as humans, not myths. We have to be honest about who they were, their strengths and their weaknesses, and we can learn a lot from both of them. To make one thing clear, there was actually no country called Greece at the time Sparta existed, roughly from the 9th century BCE to the year 146 BCE. Ancient Greece was a collection of more than 1,000 city-states that shared the same gods and similar dialects. Other Greek city-states, such as Athens and Thebes, generally feared the Spartan warriors. They were considered formidable on the battlefield and admired for their discipline and obedience. To be like the Spartans, you must prioritize your physical health. As someone who has tried to be consistent in the gym for years, I understand the challenges of finding the right exercise routine, staying consistent, and managing injuries. So how was Sparta able to produce such capable fighters in battle? The answer lies in the fact that they didn't work so much on training soldiers, they trained good citizens, and this is where we find the values that we can potentially adopt in our own lives. Like no other Greek city-state, Sparta controlled its population by thoroughly enforcing its values within. Boys were instilled with the Spartan way of life from the age of 7, and it continued until they were 30. All of this was enforced through the brutally harsh agoge military training system. It's here that Spartan values firmly took hold, including the most fundamental one to Spartan society: prioritizing the collective interest over the individual. The whole of Sparta is of greater importance than the personal ties like the family unit. Fathers were discouraged from having a strong relationship with their sons. Every citizen had a similar right to discipline any child in public. The responsibility belonged to everyone, not just the family. Within the agoge system, married Spartiates were not allowed to live at home with their wives until the age of 30. As they grew older, they were instructed to live more publicly and be thoroughly involved in instilling Spartan values in the youth. By delaying homemaking and domestic life, Sparta further reinforced the emphasis on the collective over the individual. On the battlefield, Spartan armies were divided into small groupings called anomotia. These shield walls required everyone to put the safety of the group ahead of their own natural instinct to run to safety. One vacant spot and an anomotia was greatly weakened. In battle, Spartiates were taught to seek out a beautiful death. Dying in battle was considered very honorable. Spartan families were proud and even joyous when one of their own died while away at war. These fallen Spartiates were given the privilege of having their name inscribed on their tombstone. They gave their life to the greater whole, which is the ultimate way of putting the collective interest ahead of their own. With this emphasis on the whole, Sparta was able to rely on its soldiers to fight predictably. A common problem during ancient battles was that when something discouraging happened, like an army's commander dying in the field, entire flanks would flee. Spartans didn't have this problem as their soldiers were instilled with the value of putting the collective above their individual desire to run like hell. When we applied the Spartan value to our modern lives, it suggests that we adopt a more society-focused outlook. This contrasts sharply with something like American individualism, which dominates most of the Western world. With a greater focus on the people around us, we consider how our actions and lifestyles will impact the greater good. If we were to cling closer to the Spartan example, that would entail living in the service of our country. In today's world, we're more of a global society. What we do impacts everybody, not just our own nation. It is important to consider the impact of our actions on people living on the opposite end of the globe. How does my job that requires me to fly everywhere or purchasing of forever chemicals contribute to various ecosystems around the world? We're now much more aware than ever of our environmental footprint. Politicians and governments have far more control over the environment than we do, so we have to look beyond our individual needs when we cast our ballots. You might benefit from a promised tax break, but at what cost to the whole? You could go smaller and think of your family and social circle as your own emotia on the battlefield. Does your behavior improve the lives of those around you or act detrimentally? Sometimes when we pursue personal gains, it can be at the expense of our family. We may neglect their needs as we pursue personal goals. We commonly imagine Spartans as fit, sculpted men who fought battles with nothing but a cape, underwear, a helmet, and a spear. And while they typically were fitter than soldiers from other Greek societies, they did wear armor and a tunic over top. Until the age of 20, they were expected to exercise every single day, but they were mostly engaged in sports and other endurance exercises. They participated in wrestling matches, discus and javelin throwing, running and boxing, mostly events that would be hosted at the Olympic Games. The goal was to make them accustomed to obeying commands and be well equipped to endure the hardships of combat. Unlike the residents of other Greek city-states, Spartans ate a lot of meat. Athens and Thebes were more likely to use animals for their milk and wool, but Spartans consumed them for nourishment. Their high-protein diets included a known staple called black broth, which was essentially a pork stew with pig's blood. Spartiates would also use their version of a gym to stay fit after they left the rigors of the agoge behind. Staying in good shape was not intended as an exercise in vanity. It was to ensure that all Spartiates were fit to endure war and intimidate their enemies. Seeing an army of muscular combatants must have been demoralizing for other Greek societies lacking in that department. Women didn't really have the same freedoms as Spartiate men to participate in politics, but they were freer than in any other Greek city-state. They were allowed to own land and participate in competitive activities, much like the boys. This, however, was intended to strengthen their children as a primitive form of eugenics. The thinking was that a strong man and woman would conceive a strong child. Boys in the agoge system were constantly tested on their strength and discipline. Elders would routinely goad them to fight their peers, and every member of society would be encouraged to promote competition among the students. Some of the practices in the system wouldn't exactly fly by today's standards. The boys were given too little to eat so that they would be encouraged to find other ways of satiating their hunger. With an empty stomach, they would steal food, and if they were caught, they would be punished by the adults, not for stealing, but for the very act of being caught. Spartiates needed to be cunning. Embracing competition in your own life can lead to great personal growth. It can increase your motivation and give you a sense of personal accomplishment that's hard to find anywhere else. I'm referring to a healthy sense of competition. However, the competitive spirit can easily go sour when it's driven by insecurity. Trying to outperform others at any cost can not only increase your stress levels, but destroy relationships. In a capitalist society, embracing a healthy form of competition is a virtue, and even more so when your competitive spirit drives growth in an organization. Of course, there are many examples of an unhealthy competitive spirit leading to society-wide problems. Oil and gas companies, for example, are notorious for lobbying governments to maintain their advantage in the energy sector. The Spartiates competed with their peers with whom they were expected to have good relations. They were pressured to win at all costs, but never to the detriment of the collective whole. Excessive rivalry was thought to threaten the laws that governed Sparta. As adults, Spartiates were leisure-class citizens in the absence of war. They were free to spend their time as they wished, but their culture of discipline demanded that they lived without giving in to excess. They discouraged drunken behavior and practiced moderation in general. Most Spartiates ate a healthy diet and exercised regularly. They owned farms, but they didn't have to work in the fields. They had slaves or serfs to do the work for them. Years before the Battle of Thermopylae, Sparta invaded another Greek city-state and enslaved the local population, known as the Helots. Spartiates weren't exactly kind to this population. They would occasionally bring in Helots to their gatherings and get them drunk to show the negative follies of overconsumption. While we don't have a serf population, nor wish that to be the case at all, we do live a more lavish lifestyle in the first world nations. Thanks to technological advancements and cheap labor in third world countries, we are able to maintain a comparatively cozy way of life. And no, I'm not suggesting that this relationship with cheap labor is a good thing. It's just how the economy currently functions. The vast majority of us still have to work, and increasingly we're expected to work more for less. With that said, being disciplined can also have a positive impact on your life regardless. Curbing your dependency on the more pleasurable things in life comes with a suite of benefits. You'll be more resilient and less disappointed by circumstances that aren't ideal. Learning to live with less not only curbs the waste we produce, but also lifts an unspoken burden in our minds. All the stuff and desire we have for more preoccupies us. It takes our attention away from the more important matters. Think of all the time and even anxiety that comes with seeking out the latest gadgets marketed towards people wanting to make their lives easier. And the old tech we no longer need just sits on our dressers, filling us with small pangs of guilt. Practicing intentional scarcity helps you develop a deeper appreciation for what you have, which makes people feel happier. It's perhaps the biggest case of less being more. You'll be more prepared for whatever life throws your way, whether that's sweltering heat overnight or a cold shower in the morning. Similarly, Stoic philosophers practice depriving themselves of daily pleasures to make themselves less vulnerable to the various hardships that the universe conjured. They refer to the practice as voluntary discomforts. The Spartan system also taught the value of uniformity. Boys of rich and poor families alike were expected to dress simply, even when they had the means. This value applied to adults as well, and it played a key role in one of Sparta's most important social structures. Humans are social animals, and our ability to communicate is why we became such successful hunters and were able to dominate as a species so quickly. We still benefit a lot from our social interactions with others. These interactions improve our mental health, boost our immune system, and help us live longer lives. If we all took socializing as seriously as the Spartans did, we would definitely see benefits. When it comes to landing a good job or career, it's often not what you know, but who you know. Focusing on socializing and networking can make finding good work easier, even if it can be a bitter pill to swallow for some of us. Part of me considers this type of socializing to be based on utility, which Aristotle insisted was a very temporary form of friendship. Spartiates were also expected to conform strictly to regulations and standards of behavior. These were enforced physically or exerted through social pressure at every stage of life. Other citizens routinely tested Spartiates on their code of conduct. Even the kings had to adhere to these expectations. They were subject to the same punishments that every Spartiate received for undermining the Spartan code of values. In Spartan society, someone was always watching. Even the adults who admonished the soldiers in training were scrutinized for their disciplinary actions. If they reprimanded the boys too harshly or with too much softness, they would be subject to criticism or punishment. All these observations and tests would ultimately contribute to a Spartiate standing with their peers. Their ability to participate in politics depended on a good track record. To be anointed to the elite group of elders that heavily influenced the city-state's decision-making, they needed to have conformed well to Spartan values throughout their lifetime. Your position on the battlefield would also be determined in part by how you performed in Spartan society. It could mean the difference between the front and the back of the enomotia, and in turn be the difference between life and death. This rigorous process inspired strength and obedience among Spartan citizens. Other Greek city-states admired this quality in Sparta, as they were not capable of controlling their citizens and maintaining a stable government. This upbringing made them above-average soldiers who were renowned and feared among the other Greek city-states. But it also imparted many Spartiates with a pronounced weakness, a weakness that would see them outdone on the battlefield. A feeling that someone is always watching can embolden some, but hinder the performance of others. The Spartiates were very indecisive as leaders. They often couldn't think for themselves in unfamiliar situations. They had the eyes of their elders and peers on their backs, scrutinizing every move, and the punishments for acting in an un-Spartan way were significant. They often involved physical violence and isolation. Sparta was not without bold and brazen leaders who could bring an adventurous spirit to war. The Spartan officer Brasidas was considered a genius, and his charm was even appreciated by his enemies, the Athenians, during the Peloponnesian War. He was confident and able to think on his feet in unknown territory, a virtue that wasn't shared with his contemporaries. In contrast, other Spartan commanders were overcautious, fearful, and lacking in confidence and initiative. When they ventured into circumstances without an obvious precedence, they didn't know what to do. They typically chose inaction. In a way, they were paralyzed by the Spartan gaze. This cost Sparta dearly on the battlefield. So how could the city-state of Sparta produce both the bold and the cowardly with such a uniform upbringing? The reality is that the Spartan way of life inspired different results in different people. Demands of strict obedience and constant supervision can cripple a person's confidence in their own ability to make decisions. If something didn't feel like the correct Spartan way, many froze up with uncertainty and pressure. Some were inspired by their competitive upbringing to embrace unique challenges, while others felt the weight of an entire society peeking over their shoulders. But it wasn't only the eyes of the other Spartiates that they had to worry about. There was a much more formidable presence watching their every move, something omnipresent. Beyond the eyes of the mortals was the searing gaze of the gods. The citizens and ruling members of Sparta were paralyzed by their fear of upsetting the likes of Zeus and Poseidon. Sparta was politically stable on a domestic level, but its foreign policy was very inconsistent. It swung wildly between confident determination and fearful discouragement. Part of this instability can be accredited to the need to seek approval from the gods at every turn. You may have heard of the Oracle of Delphi. She is most well known for declaring that Socrates was the wisest of all Athenians, even though he claimed to know nothing. The Greeks widely believed that she delivered prophecies directly from the Greek god Apollo. The Oracle of Delphi was often consulted on the outcomes of political actions or wars. She was like a magic 8-ball that was taken very seriously. In the war with the Persian Empire, the Oracle often gave the Spartans foreboding news about their chances. Sparta even made decisions that went against its own interest to do what it thought was in the favor of the gods. Spartans often credited the gods with natural disasters and took them as a sign that they had displeased them. Of all the Greek city-states, they were the most god-fearing. In the Battle of Plataea with the Persian army, Spartan commanders waited until the last minute to advance on the enemy because their animal sacrifice, or sphagia, had not yet shown them any signs of favorability. Spartans were so wrapped up in the mythology of the gods that they believed their royal lineage was linked directly to Zeus's son Heracles, or as you might know him, Hercules. The Macedonians also believed they were descendants of the famous strongman, so it wasn't that extraordinary to make such a claim. Depending on oracles and signs from gods is a common trait of an authoritarian society. In a setting dominated by fear over rational discussion, these religious beliefs take hold more easily. In a way, it's an extension of the Spartan upbringing. They've always had an authority figure watching over them, and the gods are simply a continuation of that authority for those who make decisions in Spartan society. From the Spartan example, we can see that there are bigger problems with dedicating yourself to a higher purpose, but fighting for something bigger than yourself can also make you stronger. It's well documented that people who work towards a higher purpose than themselves are more resilient, happier, and enjoy richer relationships. The higher purpose you choose does matter. Few of us in this day and age want to support a state that runs off slavery or serfdom, for example, but simply putting yourself in the service of improving society might be a good place to start. And in order to fully embrace that higher purpose, you need to be disciplined. Living a healthy lifestyle and building your strength is also going to contribute to your cause, even if you find yourself less distracted by the pain that comes with a lethargic lifestyle. Talking about conformity again, one Spartan value we should abandon. It proved to be a limiting factor in leadership and free thinking on the battlefield. Conformity ultimately made Sparta a society unable to adapt to the changing world around it. It was frozen in time, doomed to be outclassed by their neighboring city-states, until it eventually became irrelevant to the larger Greek society. Of course, we see the pressure to conform in our own time, but not quite in the form of nationalism. The culture of war and hyper-partisanship have created such a strong atmosphere of conformity that straying from the party line can have significant social consequences. We'd benefit a lot from more people holding their political party of choice accountable. Instead, people support their team regardless of the quality or condition of their leaders and the likely outcomes of their anointing, and disagreeing will often result in being accused of playing for the other side in the culture war. In a healthy society, we should feel free to point out absurdism, even if it comes from others we usually agree with. This is how we adapt and grow into a changing reality. And on an individual level, Feeling as though you can't point out absurdity without social repercussions is just plain frustrating. It makes you feel like you're living in an increasingly mad world. We don't need or likely want the society-wide enforcement of values demonstrated in Sparta. The truth is, they don't work for everyone. Competition can bring out a healthy desire for growth in some people, but it can also pressure others to win at all cost. And in some cases, too much discipline can leave people with an inability to adapt to change. They may also struggle to relax and have fun socially. In other words, it can make them miserable. When these values work, the results can be worthy of the ideal Spartan many of us have in our minds. It's a matter of seeing if they're right for you. And remember, these values were problematic for some of the Spartiates themselves. After losing the Battle of Thermopylae, the Spartans gave two different reasons for only sending a small contingent of their army. First was that the battle took place during a religious festival, which was a period of time when war was normally forbidden. The second was that they claimed the Oracle of Delphi demanded the sacrifice of a king. But the most likely reason is that they didn't feel they had to commit to sending so many men to fight so far away from their borders. The rationale is a mix of religious reasoning and poor foresight. The Persian army would advance its mission to bring all the Greek city-states into its empire. At the Battle of Plataea, however, Sparta and a coalition of other city-states that included Athens and Corinth finally defeated the Persians. The Spartans were strong, well-armored, held 10-foot spears, and had the discipline to fight through the front lines of the Persian army. Importantly, they had a greater purpose in mind as they did so. Many of the values they took into the Battle of Plataea are ones we can bring into our own daily struggles. The Spartans of that age were far from perfect, but the basic concepts behind the ideas they tried to pass along through their generations are still foundations for people to build on today.
And remember, if you're looking to improve your physical health, check out TrainWell using the link in the description down below to get a 14-day free trial.
If you like the videos we make and would love to support us to make bigger and better projects, we just updated the Patreon. Everyone who joins will get free access to our updated Discord server, where you can connect with the Aperture community. Patrons can choose from different tiers with perks like discounts on all the merch we have and will create in the future, private Discord channels for voting power on video topics and idea pitching, shoutouts in video descriptions, and more perks to come that will be decided by you guys, the patrons. If you don't have the means, then please don't feel obligated in any way. Subscribing and watching the videos is more than enough support. But if you do have the means and want to support, then Patreon is the best way to do so. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.